And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. It's another Saturday, and the program is Today's Africa. Today we have a very special show for you. And the show, folks, when we come here on Saturdays, we come to discuss issues of great importance where Africa and humanity in general is concerned. Over the past couple of years, we've all come to read about migration patterns, especially in the news. We've always seen young Africans, young Asians, young people from around the globe leaving their places of abode and then attempting or trying to seek what I would term, or the general term, green pastures. But in my books, we can create the pastures wherever we are. And to be able to understand what this is all about, because most of us take it as face value. We see it in the news. So many hundreds of people have drowned. So many people were going to these places and things happened. There are so many different topics on migration, and it could be environmental. It could be so many things. And today we have a very special guest who is equipped to educate us with respect to migration patterns, the causes, and we'll link it up with why people leave their places of abode. So in this particular situation, help me to welcome Mr. Mark Daria. Mark, welcome to Love Afrobeat Music Talk Radio and this program, Today's Africa.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our discussion over the next few minutes.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you on this program, because I saw your appearance on the Sovereign in Silence program, which we have here every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then you were discussing a topic on migration and stuff like that. And so we thought it would be very great to come and share your experiences, your expertise with respect to this topic, because as I've already indicated, we see young people from around the globe always trying to move or leave their places of residences to new places. So, I mean, without much ado, Mark, my first question is, who is Mark Dario, for the listeners to know who you are? The floor is yours, please.
Again, my name is Mark Daria. I'm originally I'm a citizen of the United States from New York City. I have had the great opportunity to live in different places around the world and traveled widely, notably lived in Germany and in Sweden, studied in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, and also in Poland, and have made my way, as I say, to many countries as part of a learning experience for myself to contact as many people and experience as many cultures as possible. So I've been greatly benefited by that and been able to speak with people like yourself, and thank you for providing an audience to that end. Just to round it out, I am I'm a financial analyst by trade during the day, but my secret passion at night is teaching and doing these types of broadcasts. And I've had the blessing to work for 2 universities in an online capacity at the moment, but looking forward to getting back in classrooms again.
Oh, awesome. So you have the best of all situations. That's right. Yeah, Mark, my first question to you will be, what is migration in general?
Migration is basically the movement of peoples from one place to another from their home, as you say, and there's many root causes for that as to what could be opportunity. And again, I just got finished mentioning my own background coming out of New York. I guess you could classify me as a migrant too. I've got out of New York and lived on the West Coast for a number of years in California. Currently living in Tennessee, as we've discussed previously. But aside from me, what motivates people is a number of things. There may be familial connections to other areas, people who have already emigrated to other countries. Could be a motivator. Education, as was the case with me, scholastic activities abroad, search of employment. I guess you would say the situations in a given area, the prospects is the word I'm looking for. The prospects of a better opportunity are just non-existent or very minimal. So you look for those reasons abroad. And that would be a general category of migration. What would be the motivating factors of that?
Yes, indeed. Whilst I was researching it, there are various different types of migration. Could you share some of these others, please?
I'm not sure I totally get where you're going with that, but as I say, the different types of migration could be for, as I say, for educational purposes, for job opportunities, for personal enlightenment. Could be some of those things. Political instability is certainly and when we hone it, pull it back into the discussion about what's motivating people in Africa, political instability, rebel, insurgencies. You look at a country like Nigeria with kidnappings in the Northwest and Boko Haram, religious persecutions, separatist movements within given nations. And that's just speaking of Nigeria, encompasses all three of those. This is the kind of thing that's going on, and this is stuff that motivates people.
Yeah, indeed, because we see it. We've seen it on the upsurge of late, especially those of us even in Canada right now.
Yes,
we've seen the surge. I mean, it's unprecedented. We have never seen this kind of migration into Canada, especially for people from Africa and the Caribbean to Canada. And it has its adverse effects and consequences, because in Canada right now, as we're speaking, because of the upsurge, housing has become a problem. Mm. There are a lot of people sleeping in tents. It's not pretty, because if you talk in terms of the weather that we have here in Canada, it's a little bit chilly out there. And yesterday I was very, very saddened by the fact that I went to one of the shelters and I saw people were sleeping outside, because all levels of governments are trying as much as possible to find a solution to that. And I know it's happening also in the United States, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Europe. And Mark, from where you sit, how can this be, this sort of thing be forestalled? I mean, what can we do as a society to prevent these things from happening? Because sometimes information delivered to people in so many different areas may not be the correct ones.
Yes, great point. Okay, so it's a lot of places to go with that. Let's stay on your question of what can people do? What are solutions? Let's stay on that for a moment. As far as that goes, we're talking about in a place like Canada, in a place like the United States. In other words, the recipient, the host nation, if you will. What can we as citizens of that do? Well, first thing is be aware of it. Instances like, this broadcast help to make people aware. But what can we do about it? We can do a number of things. In a individual sense, we can educate ourselves It's easy enough to do a Google search and find out what's going on and see within your even local community what kind of records there are. There's reaching out to, I'm a big fan of reaching out to, in the United States context, to your congressman. Canada, United States, many countries in the world, many do not, but many do have the ability to voice sentiments. The citizen can voice their sentiment and their concerns to their representatives. And that's something that I think we seriously underestimate in our society today, or in our societies today. And we need to understand that. We need to reach out. I have done this on numerous occasions with different things, and it is successful, particularly around election times, folks. For some reason, they pay more attention. I don't know why.
That's right. I agree. Kissing babies and stuff like that. It's part of that.
But that is certainly one avenue. Another avenue is reach out to organizations within your community. I'm a big fan of reaching out to churches or synagogues, find out what's going on in the community, who they're helping. Food pantries is a way to connect. Volunteer. You will connect with people, and that's how you'll find out who is from another country. And it's a good opportunity to mention what that really means, because it's easy for us to just go about our day-to-day lives and not really pay attention and not notice this. But when you're speaking to someone and you're handing them a loaf of bread and a couple of cans of Campbell's soup and realizing that's all they've got for the week, we need to understand what their plight is. And what is it when you come to another country and you don't understand the legal system, you don't understand what options you have, you don't understand many times the languages, certainly not the culture, even if you have the same language or a degree of conversationalism within a given language. You may not understand the culture. I know when I lived abroad, I could understand, in speaking and thinking of Germany in particular, I could understand every word that was being said, but I didn't get the jokes. So, because even the cultural aspect of it there was something that was funny, the double entendre, the play on words. It doesn't make sense to me, and we need to put ourselves in that kind of a space and understand, the fear. That can come from that. Afraid of, particularly, I'm thinking in terms of people who might be here or in a country illegally. They have to keep their head low because many of them come from oppressive governments. The idea of a police is a frightening concept, not as someone who could be seen as in Western countries, and you can still be deported, mind you. I'm not saying, you go run to the local police station, but that level of fear is something that necessarily not be the same, but it is. And it's augmented by the fact that you're out of your cultural milieu. So all of these things compound, and what this, to bring it full circle to where you and I first met, was in the Suffering in Silence. This opens people up to exploitation. It leaves them vulnerable within societies. And I think it's unpalatable for most of us in the industrialized world to think that human trafficking and the like is going on right under our noses. And we're not even noticing it, not even seeing it. But yet when people have to survive, they will do anything. And not even voluntarily, but being brought into this in the hopes of being told by someone, a confidant or a friend, that they're going to help them out, and then being lured into this seedy underside. And just to kind of just cap that off, I mean, when you look at the statistics in the United States, one out of every about 180, 185 people is somehow a victim of trafficking. And so I think most of us know more than 185 people. So that probably means that within anyone's given bandwidth, they know several people who are trafficked. And this can be from illegal labor, construction workers and the like are an easy pick on that, to actual sexual trafficking, which is the dominant amount, and obviously is usually exploiting women, but also to an amazing degree exploiting children as well. And so definitely things that we need to take a stand on. These things should not be happening in anywhere, but certainly in countries that are priding themselves on human rights and taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And you touch on something about education, for instance. Educating people sometimes, you know what, I'll tell my own story, for instance. Like when I when I came to Canada so many years ago to pursue my education, when I told my friend back then, when I told my friend, you know what, I'm in Canada, but it's not that great. You know, there's so much pressure for me and stuff. I was just floating all these theories around to dissuade him from coming, right? And he was very angry with me. I said, you know what? I have been here for about a year, and it's tough. So you can make your own. You can create your own world that can help you in your life by staying where you are. In Ghana, for instance, I went back and forth, and today he's one of the best family lawyers in Ghana. And he is never, you know, he listened to my advice. So educating people to understand that, you know what, whenever you hear that, oh, okay, everybody is going that way, that doesn't mean that you should also follow suit. You have to be able to educate yourself. But in today's world, where social media is so powerful,
Sure.
do you think we can use this same social media to educate people, to let them know that, you know what, apart from the fact that if there's a military coup or there's some disturbance, there's something that can force one to run for dear life, is it worth it?
You know, it's really interesting. I've got 100 things floating around in my head as you're bringing these things up, and I love your opinion on what your experience is. I was just this morning watching an interview from a group called the 77%. I'd never heard of them before. I don't know who they are, so I'm not endorsing or anything. But the interviewee had several people who were from Africa and had made it to Sicily, and one of the major entrance points into Europe. And without reservation, the three people she was interviewing, all of them said they would never do it again. The trials, the tribulations, the number of people who died trying to get there was staggering. And they said that and luck was the word one man used, said it was just luck that I'm here today. And all of them said, without reservation, wouldn't be here if I could do it over. Because even when you get there to that, your greener pastures, as you started opening the dialogue with, even when you get to your greener pastures, they're not all that green. Still living under the radar. You're still an immigrant, whether you're legal or not. You're not in your own milieu. So what's happening is now all of these three were illegal. So they have no documents. They have no papers. They can't work legally. So what are they doing? They're taking some odd jobs where they can, living on minimal amounts of money, which you can't live on. So it goes back to your point about living on the streets, you know, and how do you live on the streets? Now, Southern Italy might be possible, but when you start getting into the further north areas, Germany and the Scandinavian countries, like you have the weather that works against you. So how do you do this? And as I said in this interview, and I'm hearing it echoed from you and from others I've spoken to, no, I wouldn't do it. And it also is, and again, I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from doing it, but one of the interviewees did make a really great point. He said, I've left my country when it needed me, and I'm now here. And he goes, I want to go back. He goes, I made a mistake. He didn't, that's my words, not his, but basically I made a mistake. I want to go back and change my country. You know, and that was a very interesting perspective. And I think something that most of us can certainly, you know, relate to, right? At heart, we're all patriots, right? We are citizens of the countries we come from. And even though, if we're being honest, we can recognize the faults and the flaws, but no one wants to see their country demolished, disappeared, invaded, taken over, mistreated in any way. Some of us have to make alternate plans just for the sake of survival or for the survival of our family and most importantly, our children. So we will make those sacrifices. But no one, again, living in Europe, I knew a lot of refugees from Iran and Iraq, wonderful people who I can't think of one of them that was entirely happy in wherever they landed, in Germany, in France, in Sweden, in Norway, was entirely happy and felt at home. All of them dreamed of a day when one day they could return to their respective homes. Now, of course, we know in situations, this is going back quite a few decades in my youth, but those countries are still not places that you would want to willingly return to. So it's a sad story involved with all of that as well. To watch your homeland be someplace that you can't have your children raised in. So anyway, I digress. Yeah, okay. The solutions thing, again, we're talking about it from our side of it, which is important because we do need to know what to do. But I also want to flip that around and what's motivating these people to do this. And we've covered that to some extent. There are a lot of purposes for that. And you did mention something very interesting about the immigration numbers in Canada. And Canada and America tend to mirror the same type of thing. And that is, I do want to touch on this in our conversation. What I think most listeners might be surprised to hear is that most African immigration, if you will, is intra-African. Mm-hmm. It's between other countries, between regions and subregions. That accounts for over half of the movement, if you will, the migration of peoples. And it's a really kind of a surprising stat, I think, for most people. And I've seen this in several places, so I'm pretty comfortable that that's an accurate depiction. Again, these things change over time. If you're looking at it from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it's going to look different. But speaking in terms of today, it's about half the people. And I guess that kind of makes sense because I want to say, let's think back. Most of the African nations have gained their independence within our lifetimes, or slightly there above, 1950s, 1960s predominantly. And for some of the former Portuguese countries into the 70s. So you had about a 15, 20 year, basically as a result of the Second World War, when the old European empire system started to break down, there was a deconstruction of the colonial era, right? And you had countries emerging at a rapid pace, decolonization, we called it. And as a result of that, many of these countries were set up on former colonial borders, whether they were French or British or Belgian, what have you. And I do want to I think we should take some time to explore that, because what happened is a lot of times these colonial borders have no resemblance to the reality of the peoples who are indigenous in those areas. In other words, Nigeria might have people in neighboring countries who are of the same tribe, and yet they're broken together into this larger amalgamation because it was drawn along the British rule, the former British rule, who they have nothing in common with. Just look at the conflict. Again, we're picking on Nigeria today, but just stay with it. Look at the North-South divide, right? Those are two distinct entities by all extents and purposes, and yet they're one country. Now, I'm not sitting here saying we need to redraw the map of Africa and to, its current configuration. It is what it is. And I think if we learned anything in the 60s from the Biafra movement, we're going to understand that no country is going to give up slices of itself to neighboring countries. So the borders are the borders. So how do we get to, here's a major question. How do we live with people who are so different and so diverse in peace and harmony? And that's a question that I don't think most African countries have answered well. Um, it's easy to sit here and say it was colonialism,
Mhm.
and that was true in 1960. In 1965, we can make those. It's 2023, and even though the European powers still have influence in former colonies, which we cannot ignore, but it's also it's a different time. It's a different era. There are different leaders. There are different peoples, and as you mentioned, your friend who's a lawyer now. It's time to have a new crop, a new view of the world. And I do think that to an extent, when we look at migration in Africa, both Canada and the United States have benefited from this. Many of the emigres are educated and skilled workers.
Mhm.
Now, I know I've worked with Nigerians. That's probably why Nigeria is on my mind. I've worked with Nigerians in the past in Pennsylvania and in New York who have come to the United States. And they are some among the brightest people and
Yes.
most versatile people I have known.
There's no doubt about it. The
And-
brightest on the globe.
And that's a great thing. And so America likes when people are coming over and benefiting.
Drain.
It's a great thing. So come on over. But but interestingly, that stat doesn't hold true because it doesn't hold true overall. And what I'm thinking is that a lot of the migration that does occur, and I'm thinking particularly to the Gulf states, is unskilled labor
Mhm.
and uneducated. And what happens is these people, they're primarily going to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and they're being used for domestic services, for construction work, working in the oil fields and such. So again, you kind of see that breakdown of who's going where, and so I guess let's frame that out, right? I mean, I mentioned intra-African migration as the biggest proportion. The second biggest amount is emigration to Europe.
Yeah.
The third is to North America, Canada, and the United States. And the fourth is to these other nations, which are really it's kind of like the and other category,
Yeah.
but predominantly the Gulf states, a lot to Asia, some to Oceania, but primarily Australia and New Zealand. But that's kind of like the four major emigration standards, if you want to kind of help to wrap your head around that. Yeah.
But if you come to look at it, it's like the educational aspect of it is there, and people creating it bothers to me. You said something that resonates very clearly with me. Sometimes too, we have to look at the other side. The other side being criminal activities involved in that, creating panic, collecting monies, and creating some sort of a panic kind of a migration where people say, yeah, I got to go. I have to leave. Like collecting money. Most probably, and most often than not, it may not be a political situation. It may not be anything other than greedy people taking advantage of vulnerable people, promising them heaven on earth,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them every sorts of promises and stuff like that. But in the end, if one goes through and it works out, the other might want to do that.
Sure.
But then we have to also go beyond that and look at the criminal aspects of it and what it's in there, what is behind the scenes. I hope you understand where I'm taking it to.
Oh yeah, no, and you're absolutely
right.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been kind of looking at this at a top level here, talking about it in national and international terms. Now let's bring it down. Right?
Yes.
I want to stay away from the scare kind of thing that every immigrant is someone to be scared of. No, that's not true. Most are not. Having said that, there are some that are.
Of course.
And we need to be just like in any society, right? There are good and bad people. So there are people who definitely are immigrating with intent to do harm. They are criminals who are fleeing their own societies. There are people who are using smuggling and terrorists who are recruiting out of this. And we already mentioned the human trafficking aspect of it. These are population, people groups replete with opportunity to be exploited. And they're under the radar and really off the grid of protection of those host countries because we don't even know they're there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find them? How do you find someone who's under the radar? It's extremely difficult. I know in our last show we have the co-host is a former policeman, and we were talking about how do you with your day job of putting in your 60, 70 hours a week, because they do. How do you actually deal with situations of what is perceived as, and I want to emphasize that word, perceived as victimless crimes, right? Women working in, strip clubs and the like,
mm-hmm.
who are largely exploited, but we don't see that, right? So we don't know. We go in, they're dancing. We walk out, they're still dancing. We don't understand what's happening to them. All right. So, and I don't frequent strip clubs, but I know that's what goes on there. Okay.
That's right.
So, but there are people and well, who owns those clubs? Where are they getting the girls from? Where are they getting the girls from? Because there's a turnover in supply. So how is that happening? What about drugs? Because most of these women don't come over here. Now, some of them are brought over, lured over with the idea that they're going to be given modeling jobs and the like in the United States or Canada, and they're like, "Oh yes, this is great. This is that greener pasture I've been searching for." In the interim, they're given drugs and they're pulled into this life that they don't want and have no way to escape from. So there, again, Yemen. There's an interesting stat. I'm not going to try to look at it now, but I think I'm trying to go off my head. I think there was something on the order of 82,000 people who were trapped in Yemen during the COVID thing that were emigres, and it turns out that something on the order of 18,000 of them actually paid smugglers to get them back to the Horn of Africa because the situation in Yemen was so bad.
Wow.
So, I mean, to think about that, you pay smugglers to get you somewhere, and then everything shuts down because of COVID. So they never got to get into Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or United Arab Emirates, where they were intending to go, and they were trapped. So it was so poor, war-torn areas, civil war, conflict, cleansing, all kinds of stuff going on there. Bad place to be trapped. And so that they actually paid traffickers to get them back, or smugglers to get them back across to the Horn of Africa, which isn't where they wanted to be either. But at least they were back on the continent. So this is the kind of craziness that's ensuing in the world all around us. I can look that up for you and get you the source of it later if you want to see that. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I agree with you because there's no, how do they say, there's no smoke without fire, or vice versa, whatever, however we might want to put it.
Yes.
Let's look at the intra-African migration that you spoke about. It seems as if, like, one thing that I've come to realize is that even in conflict situations, after civil wars or whatever might have pushed a whole or an entire population to migrate, at the end of the conflict, they don't seem to move back.
Yeah.
They've made their homes there and stuff like that. So in situations like this, do you think it will be beholden on the governments that they left behind, or the United Nations? I'm bringing in the United Nations because they are playing a vital role in this. And still, every year something new happens, and they don't seem to have gotten a grip of what is actually happening. Because when I see young people, be it from Africa, right now, the whole thing is about Africa. You don't see only Africans, but if you look at the patterns, say from Libya crossing to Italy, you don't see only African migrants. You see young people, able-bodied young people from the southern part of Asia, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, all included in this. So from where I sit, I think it may not be because of some upheaval, but I think the thinking and the level of what's the right word? The level of I'm trying to get it correct. The level of persuasion to get people from wherever they are to move is one that has got to be looked at.
Yeah, and I think what you're looking at is this becomes a question of opportunity. Mm-hmm. Whether there is persecution, whether there is graft, corruption. At the end of the day, if I don't have a job, I can't eat. I can't have a family if I can't support them, or I won't have a family for long if I can't support them. So what do? I go where? I don't know. I go wherever the road shall take me. And you can find yourself on a completely different continent. Absolutely. What's the answer to that? Great question. The world's getting younger. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is another thing we need to look at. The population of the world has more than doubled in the last 50 years. So are all these young people, as population, as you know, is an exponential thing, right? Two people can have 10 kids, right? And those 10 kids then have 10 of their own. Do the math. It gets pretty thick pretty fast. Now, what does that mean? I don't know where it goes. There's going to be breaks that are applied somewhere along the way. Can we feed them all? No. So what happens? Well, we already see the results of that, don't we? Mass starvations. There's natural disasters. There's things that are occurring. Climate change. There's things that are going on that are reducing that number. And what we're really, again, we're at the top level here. What this means is people are dead. Yeah. Right? That's what that means. That's what we're really saying. How does the world sustain a youthful and ever growing population? The truth is, it can't sustain that. You can't have 20 billion people on Earth without some kind of leap in progress and way to be able to feed them, and more importantly, give them water, or not more importantly, but also as importantly, give them water. Right? There's only limited amount of fresh drinking water on Earth, and the more mouths you've got, the harder that becomes to sustain. So we've got a lot of sustainability issues that are out there as well. But on the personal level, what makes people move from country to country? We've already talked about a lot of it. Corruption and there's maybe persecution. Just the plain old economic motivator of the search for opportunity, search for a better life. That's a powerful clarion call. And I think that it's important for us to remember too, because what we're talking about is a world that Africa is industrializing. Africa is moving up economically, and it's the last continent to do so. The Europeans, this started with the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution in the European countries 5 centuries ago. And as a consequence of that, they wound up with their empires and basically captured the world. And ironically, if you will, the peoples that they had in their colonies, they educated in their own thinking. And so ideas like the nation state, concepts such as the nation state, which we talked about, those former borders, have taken hold. And the world sees things very much the same in a lot of levels. So we're looking through, which is not a bad thing, right? But we also need to define that prism and make sure that it makes sense. So we need to change. We need to be able to change where we need to change, and also hold on to the good things that are helping us to move forward. One of those things, to make it concrete, is that diversity we were talking about a little bit earlier. What does an immigrant contribute to the new host country? Well, exactly that diversity, that differing opinion, that way of looking at things differently. What education, living abroad is one of the best things that I would ever recommend to anybody, because it gets you out of your paradigm. It gets you out of your box. And this being from another country, you start to see things from a different perspective. Not all of it's good. Not all of it's bad. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And we have to learn to accept that and then change the things that we can, knowing that not everything is going to change. Not everything's going to be better. Again, we spoke of human nature the last time we were together, and this is something that I think we don't really grasp very hard because we don't really contemplate it much. But human nature across the planet is very much the same. It's self-centered. That's what drives us.
Yes. Yeah, it is very true. And one thing that I'm looking at right now is that despite the fact that most of these young people move into these new places, I'm looking at it from reading the news right now, that the new countries that they migrate to are also having problems.
Sure.
And they are also saying, you know what? It's unsustainable. We got to take you back from where you are. So this place, when they do that, this is where also the United Nations High Commission for Refugees also would have to step in. Because if you can sustain them and you want to send them back, the possibility of them being eliminated, being killed or imprisoned and stuff exists. So where do we go from here? Because in Germany right now, yesterday I read, the chancellor is, coming up with a proposal, as well as France, to repatriate, to sort of expressly deport migrants, people who came there, back to their own countries. My whole thing is that when it comes to Africa, because there are so many countries that are still going through the motions of being stable. So if this is effected, what do you think the role of society in general, if I say society in general, the United Nations role should be?
I have to tell you, I am not a huge fan of the United Nations.
So do I.
And the reason for that is it was built to be ineffective. And I think it has a place in the world. It does tremendous good when it's allowed to. But I also think that too many people, and this is usually in the underdeveloped world, put too much faith and hope in the United Nations. Here's the trick. The United Nations only works if everyone's in agreement.
Yeah.
You've got 192 countries. Good luck getting agreement. So, and I'm not trying to poo-poo it. I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing. I think we need the United Nations, and I'm adamant. It has done tremendous good in the world. Please don't put me on a UN hate list. I'm not a UN hater.
That's right.
But I also want to see it within the realm of what it can do. It can only do what it's allowed to do by its member states. It doesn't have a standing army. It doesn't have a police force. It only has forces that are contributed. And as we've seen in places like Haiti, even those contributing forces can be a detriment in the society, where the UN soldiers are raping the local women.
Yeah.
So I want to be very circumspect. I have little faith in any, including local governments, institutions. Again, I go back to what I'm saying is human nature, right? We put our faith in institutions, and institutions invariably let us down. And I think to sit here and say the UN will take care of this, and I've seen this a lot in the classrooms. Why doesn't the UN do this? The UN can't do it because the Security Council is made up of 5 permanent members.
Yeah.
And the US, Russia, Britain, France, and China. And those 5 have veto power. So if any one of those 5 at any given moment say, nope, not a good idea, that's the end of it. Doesn't happen. And there have been very few instances where all 5 of us are going out and being drinking buddies. That doesn't happen very often. So the UN, again, while it works within its context, I'm not putting hope for it. So to your point, what do we do? These are domestic issues, and I know Germany and France, are struggling with this. All European countries are struggling with this. The United States is struggling with this. In fact, you're hearing it already. There's, we've got an election next year coming up. There's already talk of throwing people out. Good luck finding 10 million people who are hiding under their beds. I don't know what kind of state we would turn into, or European nations for that matter. And while certainly the deportation of criminals or smugglers or terrorists, obviously that's a gimme. We got that. If we can catch them and we can identify them, and we can throw them back into the water, figuratively speaking, to whatever country they came from, okay, sure, I guess if that works, that works. But again, that's still going to be, let's be grand with it, 10%. You're still stuck with 90% of the people who are there. What are you doing with that 90%? Wow. I don't know. And I don't know. I want to be part of a country that's taking people by the back of their neck and throwing them over a land bridge, into another country. They're here. Now we should have a legal process. I'm a firm believer in legal processes. We should be respecting the laws. Look, states have borders. States have borders for a reason. I understand that they're fluid in a lot of places. Africa is a great example of that. Methods of record keeping and bureaucracy's tracking is poor in most of these lands. So how do you don't? So, it is what it is. And that kind of speaks to your earlier point is, well, who are the biggest countries in Africa that have migration? Well, it's unsurprisingly Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt are your 3 biggest recipient countries for African migration. Yeah. And why? Because all 3 of those economies are booming to upper and lesser extents, but there's work opportunities. So that goes back to where are young people going? They're going to where they can find a job. Now, are living conditions good in any of these places? Not so much, but are they able to feed themselves? And this mirrors, again, historically, I'm going to put on my history hat here, and I'm going to say, if you look at the early industrial revolution in the countries that was happening in Europe and in the United States, there was a massive migration from the rural areas to the urban areas. And you're seeing that. And I would say that Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt are representing the urban areas, if you could extend that analogy out to a country level. They're the urban areas of modern Africa. And you're seeing this magnet, the pull, if you will, this magnet of the promise of the future. And of course, as we know, again, historically, movement into urban areas in industrial societies was not a great look. At Charles Dickens, even wrote about this in Britain with the pollution and the urban overcrowding and the living in the streets. Sound familiar? It's what we're still experiencing, although we've gotten better at masking it in the industrialized world. But Africa is going through this same process now. So this isn't surprising. How does it deal with it? I hope better than we did. I mean that sincerely. But so far the track record is pretty much on par. There are winners and losers. This is going to be true anytime there's an opportunity for money. There are going to be winners and there are losers, and the truth is there's fewer winners than we'd like. So societal structure has to change, which is, again, in many countries where here's the beauty, right? We do a lot of capitalist bashing in the world today, and I'm a firm capitalist. And here's the beauty of why I love capitalism. It's got plenty of flaws.
Mm-hmm.
It's got plenty of things that can go wrong. But the thing about capitalism is it has a middle class that expands. And that is the trick of how do you save a society. If the middle class is expanding, it doesn't mean you're the jet setter, who's flying to Paris for lunch and then Buenos Aires for dinner. You're not that person. But what you've got is Maslow's. I don't know if you know Abraham Maslow. Yeah. I mean, you've got, once you get your basic needs taken care of, you're not worried about getting stabbed by your neighbor for your food. You're not worried about your food and water. Once you've got those things in place, then you can start thinking about things like obtaining an education, bettering yourself and the lives of your family. Once you get those security needs met, then you can start to go up and then eventually work your way up the hierarchical pyramid to, a stage where you're self-actualized, to stay with the Maslow conversation. In other words, you can pursue higher pursuits, studies of art and philosophy and all that great stuff, which I'm a big fan of, but most of us don't get there.
Yeah.
Most of us in that middle class, though, most of us are not worried about our neighbor stabbing us. We're driving our cars. We're going to work. We're working until we retire. And then we live kind of comfortably, not as well as we'd like, but we're still living. We're not worried about food, right? In the industrialized world, people are dying of complications of obesity.
Mm-hmm.
In the underdeveloped world, people are dying of famine. That middle class that we're talking about, that expansion has to go out. There has to be a leveling off. There's too much in one place, not enough in another. There has to be a leveling out. And I think we're smart enough to do that. Not in every nook and cranny, not in every country of the world. And I do think that if you look at the history of the world over the last 300 years, I do think you've seen that expanding out. What used to be just pocket of Western Europe and North America has expanded now. And it's in Latin America. It's in large parts of Asia, not all of Asia. India is coming up to a place that it was never at 30, 40 years ago. But we need those security needs met, right? We need to be able to know that we have food and we don't have to worry about where we're going to eat or where we're going to drink. And we need to understand that, civil war, strife, ethnic cleansing, that these things are largely behind us. But every now and then it rears its head that it's not that far away.
Yeah. Very interesting topic indeed. How do you see within this? Let me not even go far. 5 years from now, how do you see the pattern, changes, occurring within this same sphere?
Great question.
5 years. I'm not even going to go to 10. 5.
Yeah. No,
because
5.
even right now, we've seen an uptick of migration patterns. Within the next 5 years, is it going to be or down?
I think 5 years from now is I think things are probably going to be worse.
Wow.
I think that right now we're at a period in history. There are like anything, there are peaks and valleys in history. I think right now we're at a time of change. The last few years, and I think the next few years, we're seeing, just thinking in terms of great power politics, the increasing level of competition between the United States and China is going to dominate the world scene. What's going on with countries like Russia trying to gobble up its smaller neighbors and reinstitute its old empire. You're seeing all kinds of craziness in the Middle East, which is destabilizing to Africa as well, certainly in the eastern section. So how are these things going to, until these things start to settle down into a new norm, we don't really know. But I do know that historically speaking, while the world's preoccupied with larger issues, if you will, and that sounds arrogant to say that, but that's not what I mean, but these things do suck up the oxygen in the room, if you will. So your United Nations is going to be obsessed with these questions and not what's happening in the Gambia.
Yeah.
And that is simply just the raw truth. So what does that tell us? That says, well, the Gambia has to figure out what to do because the cavalry isn't coming over the hill. So what is it going to do? How is it going to feed itself? How is it going to sustain itself? How is it going to, this is where we need these youthful people looking at it in a new way, and saying the old way isn't working. What do we need to do? I look to something like the African Union to start to, right. And that's statement. But again, the faith in institutions. But where do we go? What's the framework? We've got to start reaching out to people who aren't like us. If I've got to live in this country that is now a country, and I've got to deal with people who are different ethnicities, of different linguistic abilities or capabilities, and different cultural backgrounds, I'm going to have to learn about them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have them learn about me. And what we need to do is stop looking at each other as threats.
Yeah.
And because you speak a different language than me, or a different variant different variant of my language, or your skin color is different, or your religion is different, as long as you're not trying to put a knife to my throat, I'm not going to put a knife to yours.
Yeah.
How's that for a starting point?
Very true. Very, 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 very true. And we have a couple of minutes left. But before we go, remember when we started the program, I made mention of environmental migration. And I was reading yesterday and even this morning, preparing for the program, the small island nation of Tuvalu in the South Pacific, close to Australia, is going underwater. So the Australian government has made it a point to absorb all of them. So they are going to be migrants. The Australian government is going to give asylum to the entire country of Tuvalu.
Yeah.
And the entire country is going to be refugees in a new country. So this tells us that it's not only economic migration, political, what have you, but environmental can also play a part.
Sure. Like
with this situation. And I think most parts of Africa are also experiencing famine, drought, and all these kind of stuff. So far as we can also think about this topic, it's not going to end very well. Just like you're saying, within the next five years, I'm not talking about 10 years, 5 years is going to get worse, and it's scary, very scary.
Sure. And actually, it's funny you tap on that, because when I was saying my 5-year prediction there, and I hope I'm wrong, believe me, but environmental concerns is one of the things that I was thinking about in the back of my mind. I mean, the Sahara Desert is expanding. We know that. And so with that is decreasing areas of farmland, forcing people to migrate to other places. You can't eat sand, folks. So you got to migrate. Now all of a sudden you've got people groups who are coming into a new area. Wait a minute, this is my land. What are you doing? So you've got that kind of clash that's going on. So climate, and I'm reluctant to call it climate change, because the Sahara Desert's been expanding for a while, and we're also depleting our own resources, right? Because you've got to eat, so you cut down the woodlands, you deforest. Why? Because someone wants to buy the tree. We were talking about West Africa with the cocoa beans last time we were together, and what's going on there. You've got international organizations that are all in agreement, companies that are in agreement. Everybody's agreeing, but it's still happening. Why is it happening? Because the farmers, the people who are getting this, are sending their children out in the fields to go work 15 hours a day to pull cocoa beans because they can get money for it. So you've. What's the answer? Again, I don't have one. I wish I did, but you and I would both be sitting in different places if we had all the answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do is grapple with the questions right now and raise the awareness, because if we can ask the right questions, we can get to some portion of a correct answer. And knowledge is the first step. And I applaud you and your show for doing what it's doing, and trying to make people aware. Every one of it, you know the starfish story, right?
Go ahead, please.
Every one of us can save one starfish, and probably a lot more. And so, you know, the starfish on the beach, you're walking along, and you know, maybe your audience hasn't heard that, so it's probably a good way to wrap it up. You're walking along the beach, see a guy in the distance, and you can see him flinging things from the distance back into the ocean. You get closer, and he's still doing this. He's doing this for coming up to him now for half a mile. And finally, you come up to the guy and you go, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm flinging all these starfish are up on the beach, and I'm throwing some of them back through." And you laugh and you go, "Well, what good is that? You can't possibly save all these starfish." Picks up another one, he throws it in the water. He goes, "Yeah, but I could save that one."
Wow.
And that is one of the most poignant stories that I know. I actually wrap up most of my classes with that, because it tells us we have the power. You and I have the power. Just by having this conversation today on the radio is giving us the power to touch people and to make them think. And if we can do that, and we can get one person to move into action that can save one person or change one person's life, we've been a success.
You hit it right out of the ballpark, because this is exactly what I was going to say, that we have to help each other. We have to look at ourselves as humans. Because at the end of the day, if we help one another, we are helping the human race.
Yes.
There's no one single race, but the human race.
I am so glad you said that, because that is one of my favorite. There is only one race.
It's the human race.
We love to divide ourselves. That's a national pastime in every country. And that's the wrong attitude. You know what? There is two classifications of people. That's people who are out to help and people who are out to hurt. I don't want anything to do with the people who have to hurt. I want to be part of the people who help.
Wow. Powerful. Folks, on that note, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mark for making time for this program. And we hope to bring you back again, because the question and the answers are hard to come by. But if we don't talk about it, we will not find the answers. We may try to find answers, but the answers may elude us. But I always say that if you have a story and you don't tell the story yourself, and you ask somebody else to tell the story, it doesn't become your story. It becomes his story or her story. And on that note, thank you, folks, for listening and watching us on Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And this program was brought to you by Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And it's Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We come here to talk about issues of relevance where Africa, an entire human race, is concerned. On that note, I would like to say thank you for your time. Oh, before we go, how can people reach you, Mark? I'm sorry about that.
How can they reach me? I will get you some information that they can reach out to me with.
Awesome. So, folks, we'll bring Mark back again, because this journey has just begun. Because if you look around, we have seen a lot of young people from Africa, the Caribbean, the diaspora, from South Asia, from East Asia, where have you? They are finding places where they can go and resettle. But then, at the end of the day, will they have made the right choices? Your guess is as good as mine. And take care of yourselves, folks, and each other. And until next Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye-bye.